Here on D&D Rules School today, we're going to be learning the basics of combat for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Hi everyone, my name is Nate, and you are watching WASD20, a channel about tabletop RPGs and fantasy maps. D&D Rules School is a series for people who might be newer to D&D 5th edition or who want a review of some of the basic rules. In the first video, we talked about the very basics of the game. And in part 2, we talked about the abilities and skills. I'll put links to both of those videos up at the top and you can check them out. In today's video, we will tackle some of the basics of combat. If you find this video helpful, or if you know of others who are trying to learn the game, I would really appreciate it if you would share it with them too. So, combat. What exactly is combat, and when does it start? Quite simply, combat in Dungeons & Dragons begins when two or more opposing forces fight one another with weapons and or magic, and it usually gets a bit more tactical. Now, the rules make mention of the three basic modes of play: exploration, social interaction, and combat. Exploration and social interaction are a bit more freeform, with lots of narration and occasional skill checks where you might roll a die to determine the outcome of something. Combat in D&D, on the other hand, is usually much more mechanical, which means we make greater use of the rules, really digging into the stats and abilities on the character sheet in a way that we generally don't in other parts of the game. That's one of the reasons combat is a natural fit for a session of D&D Rules School. As I noted earlier, combat occurs when opposing forces decide to fight each other. This doesn't have to be a fight to the death necessarily, it could just be a tavern brawl, for example. And I guess technically it doesn't even have to be a fight between two parties or individuals. We could use these rules for combat when there's going to be a struggle that will involve movement speed and actions in a way where there's competition against the clock or against non-player characters. But anyway, these rules are contained in a simple outline called the Order of Combat, which is a simple way of organizing the chaotic nature of combat. At the highest level, these combat encounters are broken into rounds and turns. In the world of D&D, a round is about 6 seconds for your characters and monsters. Now, that one round at your table could easily take 5 or 10 minutes, but for all of our hemming and hawing and figuring out abilities and looking at our character sheets and making rolls and decisions, this all takes place in 6 seconds in the game world. In one round, each character or monster gets to take one turn, and the order of these turns is determined by initiative, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, before we get into this order of combat, I want to pause and thank my friends at Absolute Tabletop for partnering with me to bring you these videos. AbTab makes top-notch RPG books, so if you're looking for a good D&D adventure or some Dungeon Master inspiration, go check out their books via the link in the video description. You can pick up books in print or PDF form, and I highly recommend their Every PDF bundle because you get all their PDFs at about a 60% discount, so you'll have tons of tools and inspiration for your game. Thanks, Absolute Tabletop. So the order of combat. The first step is for the DM to figure out if anyone is surprised. If neither group is trying to be sneaky or stealthy, then we can assume that they see each other and no one is surprised. If either the adventuring party or the NPCs or monsters are trying to be sneaky, the DM will usually ask for a dexterity stealth roll. This is an ability check, which we talked about back in episode 1. The outcome of that roll is usually pitted against the passive wisdom or perception scores of the opposing side. If any one of the opposing sides fail to notice the sneaky ones, then they will start the combat round surprised. This means that those characters or monsters will not get to move or take actions and reactions during the first round of combat.
Surprise!
Now that we've figured out if anyone is surprised, it's time to determine the order in which everyone will get to take their turn during the combat rounds. This is one of the most exciting moments of playing D&D. That moment when the DM says, roll initiative. Rolling for initiative means that you roll a d20 and add your initiative bonus to that number. This number is usually just your dexterity modifier. The DM will also roll initiative for each of the enemies involved in the combat, or sometimes a group of enemies together, and assign an initiative score to each of them. Using these numbers, the DM will then rank each individual combatant in order from highest to lowest. This is the combat initiative order that will be used until the end of the encounter. When it's your turn in the initiative order, you have several choices of what you can do. In this episode, we're going to focus on the basic move and attack actions. In the next episode, we'll look at several other options for actions you can take during combat. But it's generally a pretty good policy, if you're new to the game, just to try to think about what your character would do. Don't look too carefully at your character sheet just yet. Try to think of what your character will do, and the DM will help you determine what you should roll. So if you are wanting to do the standard move and action, like move and attack on your turn, you do have the option to choose which one you want to do first. Your movement is determined by your speed on your character sheet. Every creature has a base walking speed that affects their movement, and there are also items and character options that can increase or decrease it from that base speed. Keep in mind that if you are playing with grids and miniatures, 1 square or 1 hex usually is going to be 5 feet. So a character that has a base walking speed of 30 feet can therefore move 6 squares on their turn. In any case, this movement speed determines how far your character can move on their turn while still taking an action. Keep in mind that you do not have to move the entire distance of your speed. That's just the maximum distance you can move. And you can even break that movement into smaller moves. So for example, if your speed is 30 feet, you could move 20 feet, attack, and then move another 10 feet after that. So if you take your move first, next you'll take your action. And for episode 3 here, we'll just focus on the attack action. This generally means that you are going to attempt to hit another creature with a melee weapon, something like a sword or an axe, or a ranged weapon, maybe shooting an arrow from your bow, throwing a dagger, or firing a crossbow, or using an offensive spell. You might remember from previous episodes that for most of the game, players will tell the DM what they want their character to do, and the DM will narrate what happens. Whenever there is something the DM feels is challenging enough to warrant it, however, the player makes an ability check. They roll the d20 and add the relevant modifier. They're trying to match the difficulty class, or the DC. This is the target number. The same is true here in combat, but the difficulty class usually takes the form of armor class. Armor class is a number that represents how difficult it is to hit a character, monster, or object. Even though it says armor in its name, it doesn't necessarily just mean actual armor. All creatures in D&D have an armor class, even if they don't wear armor. If not from armor, a high armor class could come from naturally thick hide or tough scales on a dragon, for example, or it could also come from having very high dexterity, which means you'll be harder to hit. For a character without any armor or shields, your armor class would be 10 plus your dexterity modifier. And yes, that can be a number less than 10 if your dexterity modifier is a negative number. For characters who are wearing armor or carrying a shield, you'll want to factor in additional modifiers using the equipment section of the rules, which are found in Chapter 5 of the Player's Handbook. This is the number that, like difficulty class, must be matched or exceeded in order to successfully hit or get hit. Now that you know how you and your enemies are defended, let's take a look at how to actually attack them. With your attack action, you determine how you want to attack them. For example, let's say your fighter, Rogar, is facing off against a zombie. The Dungeon Master indicates that it's your turn, and you say something like, "I bolt forward across the chamber and I swing at the zombie with my great axe." At this point, you roll to attack. You're not worried about damage just yet. First, you need to see if you are going to hit. When you roll to attack, you will always roll a d20 and add your attack bonus. Let's go ahead and roll our attack for Rogar. All right, I got a 6 on the die, and then I get to add my attack bonus of +5 for a total of 11 to hit. Now, a hit only happens when I meet or beat the armor class of the thing I'm trying to hit. In this case, the zombie has an armor class of 8, so it's very easy to hit, and I do hit the zombie. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail of the character sheet here, but if you're confused about where this attack bonus comes from, in the case of my fighter Rogar, with this weapon, I use his strength modifier plus his proficiency bonus, which is +2. So I got the 3 and the 2, which gives me an attack bonus of +5. For our damage bonus over on this part of the character sheet, we don't get to add the proficiency bonus, so it's just our strength modifier. So in this case, it is 1d12 plus 3. You can learn more about where all these numbers come from in my character creation tutorial, which I'll put a link to right up at the top there. So in this case, we did hit the zombie. Now we need to roll our d12, our 12-sided die, to determine how much damage we're going to do. So in this case, I roll the d12, I got a 2, and then my modifier for the damage is plus 3 for a total of 5 slashing damage. So that's how much damage was done to the zombie on your turn. The Dungeon Master then subtracts that number from the total number of hit points the zombie has. Sometimes when we roll the d20 to attack, it will either land on a 1 or a 20. If the total is a 1 or a 20 before any of the modifiers, we call this a natural 1 or a natural 20, or more popularly, a critical fail or critical hit. These rolls can be both fun and frustrating depending on which end of the attack you're on. If you roll a natural 20, the attack hits no matter what the target AC is. However, if you roll a natural 1, the attack automatically misses regardless of any of the modifiers you add. On a critical hit, you get to roll your damage die twice, and then add your modifier. This could be a lot of damage, but if you roll low on the die twice, it could actually be pretty underwhelming. Many of these rules for combat would be used in any kind of time-sensitive struggle in a confined space, like a race in which a bandit is trying to run toward the charges to light them so the mine will collapse, while the rogue is trying to catch up and tackle her, and the wizard is going to try to knock some rocks loose with a spell to block her path. We might not really think of this as combat, but whenever there is a time-sensitive competition like this, we often do have players roll initiative and we use the rules for combat. So these have been some of the basic rules for combat in D&D 5th edition with a focus on moving and attacking. In the next video, I look forward to covering the other actions you can take in combat, as well as rules for many of the special circumstances that may arise in combat. So make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned for, well, like several months or maybe years, because that's generally how long I wait for D&D Rule School videos. Yeah, sorry about that. But hey, this video is made possible by my amazing patrons who support WASD 20 on a monthly basis. Thank you so much to these amazing people and the rest of the patron army. If you get value from my videos and you want to support my work as well, there are some pretty cool rewards and benefits, and you can check them all out over at patreon.com/WASD20. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. Take care, happy gaming, and you'll see me again very soon.